Hello, I have pants on today. And welcome back to another Guild Wars 2 Elite Specialization ranking video. Today, I'm going to be doing the Path of Fire Elite Specializations, since I've done the Heart of Thorns, and then we'll go to the base classes for the final video. But welcome everyone again, and let's get started. Okay, everyone, welcome back once again. Last year was a little bit longer, so I'm going to try to keep it fairly brief, and maybe keep my discussion and reasoning as to why I'm putting them in certain rankings a bit shorter. So, no specific order, because with Path of Fire, the Elite Specializations were all revealed at the same exact time. It just didn't roll out. Well, unless you want to talk about like the specific showcase within the actual announcement, but it's not that big of a deal. So we're just going to be going straight through as they're already ordered here on the tier maker. So first up is the Deadeye. The Deadeye. I think personally, I would place the Deadeye in once again a PvE scenario. Forgot to mention that briefly on my other video. PvE ranking. I think for the Deadeye, it's more of a B ranking. It's pretty fair. Its boon application and uptime in terms of might and I think fury is really nice in raiding scenarios. But I don't think the rifle is consistently powerful enough in terms of raiding. I think Daredevil might even be a little bit better, or Core Thief. But I think, Deadeye is fair. Open world PvE Deadeye is so much fun. You can kill ads very quickly and go on to the next ones. In higher rating scenarios, you have boon application. You do have some moderate damage, and you have new stolen skills. So for the Deadeye, I'd probably place that at a high B+ area, almost an A. It's pretty good. It's pretty solid. Maybe some rifle adjustments or tweaks, or possible improvements to cantrips, of course. Next, we have the Firebrand. And for the Firebrand, I'm actually putting this at the S tier, even though I do have my own issues with its design in terms of its overall power creep. But that's primarily why I'm putting it at S tier, because it is so damn powerful in terms of its healing, its condition damage, and also its total control with Tome of Courage and its other abilities and its mantras. I do think that the tomes and the mantras, in terms of design and flavor, they just kind of copied each other, so it's not as fulfilling. I think if the tome auto attacks were like a 1200 range, a longer range projectile ability that would bounce or something, like for heals or for stability, it would not only create a sense of more skill to an already easy class and a very effective elite specialization, but it would also differentiate itself from just the normal mantra abilities, because it's like you have a cone on your tomes, and then you have another cone effect on your mantras. But overall, Firebrand is fantastic for all of my aforementioned reasons, with healing, cleansing, damage reduction, projectile mitigation, condition damage, flat damage, sustain, all of the above. Firebrand is pretty S tier. Quickness too, quickness application. You love heal brands in terms of quickness. Next up is the Mirage. And I think Mirage used to be S tier, but they have since nerfed it and adjusted it. And I think A tier is where it should be. I think most elite specs want to kind of sit around A and B. S tier's kind of getting on the power creep side is how I somewhat like to look at it as well. Apologies for the noise outside. But I think Mirage is really effective in terms of its condition damage. It has received some nerfs in the past, some questionable in terms of my own opinion. I don't think they needed to nerf the damage as much in PvE. It was more of a PvP issue, and I think they could probably, give some adjustments, not necessarily buffs or nerfs, but maybe take a look at some of the design. I do know that the one endurance bar in PvP is very tough to learn, but Mirage is very powerful regardless, and so maybe it does need that kind of skill balancing in terms of you need to learn the class, so on and so forth. But I think Mirage overall really good. Abilities are fun, and yeah, I think so far so good. Maybe some more buffs to the other ambush abilities, or something like that. There are also a couple utility skills which I don't see a lot of use, like the one where you assault someone and you blind them and you teleport back, so on and so forth. Next up, we have the Renegade. It's weird because I'm gonna put it at A tier for its truthful effectiveness in raiding and PvE endgame. Alacrity, in terms of the Renegade, it's really strong. People love Alacrigades, and they're almost S tier. I don't place them at S tier because of its awkwardness with the short bow and also the spirits. They're kind of awkward. Especially the short bow 4, I've, said this multiple times, but that skill is still bugged in a way, or its intended design, I think, is heavily flawed because you can't actually use it behind you, even though it's an AoE ability. Circular AoE ability, and all of the AoE abilities, your character will turn around and use the ability. I don't know why they can't do it for the short bow, or have decided not to do it for the short bow, but I think overall the Renegade, it's strong. It's strong in terms of its actual spirit effects, though I do think the implementation is still a little wonky. And its other traits are a bit meh, unless, of course, you take boon uptime and you're doing alacrity, regen and protection, so on and so forth. So I think Renegade is strong, but I do think there are areas that are glaringly problem areas, especially like the short bow's clunkiness. I don't know. Just something feels off with Renegade, but that could also just be Revenant in general feeling a little off. Next up, we have Scourge. I'm actually going to be placing Scourge at S tier for its support capability in terms of barrier. My only issue with Scourge is its Serpent Siphon ability, and also its Raider Shade Grandmaster trait. I don't think that trait necessarily needs to exist anymore in Guild Wars 2. I know World vs. World players love that trait because it makes their shade so much bigger, but it's just been nerfed so heavily into the ground to the point where it's like they're on the brink of just completely redesigning that trait, but they're just hanging on to it for some reason. And I just think it's better to be scrapped. In terms of the Serpent Siphon, I don't understand why it's a pickup mechanic. I think it'd be better if it was just a linear AoE where you send out a sand serpent, and as it passes through allies, it'll grant them a little bit of barrier. But talking on the barrier application, Scourge has a great time applying barrier to its allies, and also it does decent condition damage. I do think you can probably, tweak and improve condition damage, maybe some boon corrupt as well. But Scourge, I think, is an S tier. It's a lot of fun. I would like sand shades to be more accessible. Maybe if they lasted 5 seconds longer, but they did reduce the cooldown, which is already a great change in my opinion. But these are just more minor tweaks, but I still stand by Scourge as being S tier. Next up, we have the Soulbeast. Now I think the Soulbeast for its Druid Elite specialization is a bit more B tier in terms of PvE endgame. Soulbeast can be pretty cool in terms of its condition damage, but that's, I think, really where it kind of stops. I know Soulbeast is really fun in PvP when you're playing power specs because of its Sikkim longbow interactions. I do think the Soulbeast is fairly balanced, but I do think the biggest issue for it is probably the daggers and maybe a couple of the traits. A couple of the traits feel very self-sustain focused, which is fair and I think is cool. But in terms of PvE, you can really only take one trait line that being the stance share, improvements to quickness or boon up time whenever you gain quickness, so on and so forth. But I think, you know what, Soulbeast I think is pretty well balanced when it comes to PvE. I do think in terms of the discussion with PvE, people want professions to be bolstered up, but I do think those overperforming classes should be kind of nerfed. Just take minor hits to some of their skill abilities, and then bring the lower performing ones up a little bit, giving them 5-10% increases to a select few skills. That would make them more useful to use. Next up, in terms of endgame PvE, we have the Spellbreaker. I think the Spellbreaker, I kind of want to put it C and I kind of want to put it B. I would say probably a B minus C plus in terms of its effectiveness in endgame PvE. It has its Magebane tether, which is really nice. It applies more might. It allows, you know, the Spellbreakers to have something to cling on to in PvE. But I do think Spellbreaker was a specialization designed with a focus on PvP and maybe World vs. World. I think Winds of Disenchantment is nice in World vs. World and PvE. Not really suitable for PvP in World vs. World. Not really suitable for high-end PvE because raid bosses don't often apply multiple boons to themselves or to their ads. I think that'd be really cool if there was more boon application that bosses had. Not just like, oh, they have one stack of regen or one stack of protection, where they would literally cycle through and be like, at this stage, they're applying like 5 might, they're applying fury, they're giving themselves alacrity and a regen. Something where you really have to focus in on the boons. And Spellbreaker really goes heavily in the boon niche, so that's why it's better when it's fighting against actual players and not NPCs. So for the sake C plus, B minus, it's there. Next up, Weaver. I think Weaver is S tier, but I don't think it is overly inflated because Weaver is quite a difficult class to play. And I think that's also an aspect of the whole ranking system, which people might not necessarily look at, the difficulty of these classes. And is the power outcome reasonable for the difficulty? And I think Weaver does such great damage. It's really fun to play. You can play it in almost any game mode because it's a damaging specialization. It's a specialization focused on interacting with damage, how you apply damage, what types of damage you're doing, condition damage, flat damage, and giving yourself some, dueling traits as well, with bolstering yourself with barrier and vigor and dodging. But I think Weaver is A tier because it's very difficult to fully pull off, but when you do, you reap great benefits. I think in terms of the S tier, Firebrand and Scourge are both really great, but they're very easy to play, so that's why I put them at S tier. S tier is more of like a precaution, like they're getting a little strong. Maybe want to pull them back just slightly. But the top A's are really good. Next, in terms of the top A's, or possibly top B's, is Hollowsmith. I almost said Hollowmancer. You guys know I'm not an NG player, but when I do play Engineer, I play Hollowsmith. I really enjoy it, and I do think you can get a lot of damage out of it. So I'm gonna say A tier, A minus, high B, because I think the damage is probably very logical and fair. And you can get a lot of benefits out of it. And it's complex, but it's also, in a way, easy to pick up. It has mechanics where if you're not an engineer player or you don't really know how to, juggle all these skills, it's still easy to pick up. But when you start focusing in on maximizing your damage, that's when you really need to start looking at your skill rotation and so on and so forth. But even if you're a new player, you can get a decent amount of damage out of it. So I think Hollowsmith is also an A tier. It's pretty perfect in terms of, you know, logical damage, logical difficulty, so on and so forth. Very interesting design. And my favorite engineer, specialization, and my favorite way to play engineer. So I think in terms of the S tier, we have Firebrand, we have Scourge. Those are very powerful ones that are kind of easy to play. The A tier are the ones who have really good damage, and it makes sense with their actual playstyles and difficulty. I do think Renegade is the only outlier one, though I'm not disregarding its actual, you know, impact. The B tier could use slight tweaks or a little bit more buffing, but overall I'd say it's still pretty good, this being the Deadeye and Soulbeast. And then C tier is the one where it's fairly weak in terms of PvE and endgame PvE. But all in all, I think that this is a pretty fair assessment of the Path of Fire Elite Specializations right now. I think that Path of Fire started out with multiple classes having S tier. I think Mirage, Weaver, and Hollowsmith, and on top of Firebrand and Scourge, were all S tier. They were all really, really strong, and ArenaNet really blew out of the gate with just power creeping all these elite specs. So I hope with expansion 3, they don't necessarily go right out of the gate. And I hope they don't repeat their Path of Fire implementation. I really hope that they take the Heart of Thorns route, where they let it kind of simmer and then build up to it, and not just make the whole game like a complete chaotic battlefield. So I have high hopes for expansion 3, but this is how I would rank it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I would love to hear how you guys would rank it, what your thoughts on the current Path of Fire Elite Specializations, your hopes for expansion 3. All my links are down below, and I'll be doing the core classes next. Thank you everyone for watching once again. All my links are down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye everyone!